Chinese. So we worked this out and I dropped the bombs, pickled them, and then dove for the ground. I didn't climb, but I dove for the ground because the grounds sometimes will help to absorb the concussion. And it worked out okay. So the guys got out, and 25 years later we were sitting in a restaurant in Buffalo, Wyoming, and I noticed the guy across the way had a Marine Corps tie pin. And so we struck up a conversation, and he had been in the 1st Marine Division. He had been at the Chosen Reservoir, and I asked him if he remembered the day when the 2 Corsairs came over in a snowstorm and gave me a little close air support. I said, yeah. He said, well, I said I was one of them. His mouth dropped open. He jumped up out of his chair and ran the length of the table and came around and hugged me. I won't tell you what he said. But anyway, using Marine Corps language. But anyway, people looked at us like we were a couple of crazy fools. But anyway, it was a nice run. And today we still trade Christmas cards and still in contact. So there's a bonding that goes on in the military that is hard to replace. And I'll shut up.
Wow, what a guy. Well, our speakers today, we started World War II, Korea, and now we're going to post-Vietnam. Our speaker now, Gary Black, got his rating in his wings in 1977. But I have to tell you, he has flown operationally off 3 aircraft carriers, but told me that he has actually flown off 9. To me, something like that is absolutely mind-boggling. But I would like to introduce to you Navy retired Gary Black.
Thank you. When I was going to college, the Vietnam War was going on. And I needed to pay for college, so I signed up for a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship. I'd never flown an airplane in my life. And while I'm in the ROTC program, the draft, I had the lottery, and that's the only lottery I won. I was number 13 on the draft to go to Vietnam, but I was already enlisted in the Air Force going through college. So anyway, 4 years of college, I got commissioned in the Air Force, and then they do the flight physical. And I had been a runner, and my heartbeat was 40. And the Air Force, in their wisdom, goes, boy, if you have less than a 50, you can't fly fighters. How about an IC-130? Now, no, I want to fly fighters. And so I walked over to the Navy recruiter. Geez, we don't have any rules like that. You know, we can put you in a nice F4 Phantom if you do well enough. And do you guys remember an old movie which Richard Gere and Deborah Wingard called An Officer and a Gentleman? So I went to that program called Aviation Officer Candidate School down in Pensacola, Florida. And I was a little bit late getting there in the taxi because I didn't realize all the drawbridges were up, and I wanted to have my last day on the beach. And taxi pulls up, and the drill instructor with the black hat was there, and he opens the door, and I'm going, wow, this is really great service. And then he grabs me by the throat and drags me out of the car, throws me on the ground, stands over me, says, I'm just going to make real chicken poop out of you. What's your name, son? And I'm Black, or excuse me, Smith. And my last name is Black. So that was my first day in the Navy, starting in the hull. But got through the program, did really well. And eventually got commissioned in the Navy. And we started off in a T2 Buckeye, built down in Columbus, Ohio, a twin-engine jet. And then we went to the A4, which was a single-engine jet, and we would do carrier qualifications on the Lexington, which was World War II vintage wood deck, but we had an angled deck where Leon had to land on a straight deck. And if you did well enough, the top 10% of people could get fighters. And then we had attack, and then we had patrol and helicopters. And I managed to get one of the 4 Phantom slots. The F4 Phantom was the hot airplane of the day. There was an F-14 coming out, but that was just pretty much for Vietnam aces and those guys. You had to pay your dues in the Phantom. And so do I want to go to Virginia, Oceana, or do I want to go out to San Diego? And the Beach Boys are big at that time. They had these songs, Surfing USA, 2 girls for every guy. You know. As for me, I had my convertible and I headed west out to San Diego. And as I'm going up I-15, just right by Naval Air Station Miramar, unfortunately there's a big bird mark on the freeway short of the airfield, and I go into the gate and I go over the F-121, the F4 training rack. And they went, "Instant black, this is your lucky day. We just had an F-14 crash, both crew members perished." They said the next nugget that comes in the gate, you're going over to the F-14 rack. And so I got right into F-14s right away, but everybody else in my class, 3,000 hours, aces, Vietnam combat experience, and here I am with 80 hours in my logbook, and the scariest thing I had is probably, a thunderstorm. But managed to get through the F-14 rack. I had lots of great mentors, and it really is exciting. Your very first time out to the aircraft carrier, landing at night in rough seas. Fantastic experience. I did not have any combat in my 20 years. It's probably a very good thing because I was in the Cold War. And the Cold War, as you remember, was against the Soviet Union, and it was a nuclear shooting war. I have dozens of intercepts on Soviet Bears, Badgers, Bisons, MiGs, Aleutians, and Bays, and hanging under their wing were 2 nuclear-tipped cruise missiles that would go Mach 3 or Mach 4. And you don't have to be really close with a nuclear weapon. So our job was always to meet them 400 or 500 or 600 miles out, and if they started heading towards the carrier and started activating things, we were going to knock them down. And the F-14 was the ideal airplane for that because we carried this Phoenix missile that could knock down bombers. And 2 of my great stories that I love to tell is how do you train against a Mach 3 missile? Well, we used SR-71s. We would be down in San Diego, and they would launch SR-71s out of Northern California. And SR-71 went somewhere around Mach 3 up at about 80,000 feet. And F-4 couldn't get it, F-15 couldn't get it. The only airplane in the world that could knock down something like that was an F-14. But you still only had about a 2 or 3 second window to do it. And we'd get one pass going that way. He went around Mexico, turned around, and then we get another intercept on the way back. And the other neat story is how would you defend against all the electronic jamming and shaft jamming that the Bear bombers were going to do, because they were jamming all the radars and communications as they're coming in on the attack. Well, we would use our own B-52s, and they would be off the coast of California, and we would be running in on them, and they would be trying to attack our carriers, and they would be jamming like crazy and throwing out bales of chaff, and we could actually burn through it with our F-14 radar. And finally we got a call from Los Angeles Air Traffic Center. Guys, you have to cut it out. We can't talk to any of the airliners. All the communications are jammed around here. So it was a very fun career, and kind of wrapped it up on the aircraft carrier George Washington. I was a flight owner where we actually built the aircraft carrier, and I got to train the crew for the aircraft carrier. And we had Barbara Bush came down, and we commissioned that aircraft, and it's called Christening. And then later that day, I had a 2-week-old daughter, 2-week daughter, and she had not been baptized yet. In the Navy, the tradition is you take this 200-pound ship's bell off the bow, and you build a stand for it, then you invert it, and you put the water from the 7 seas in there, and if you're a nuclear person, you put a drop of reactor water in there. If you're an aviator, you put a drop of jet fuel in there, and then you dip your baby in there, and they're baptized under the ship's, and then you inscribe the child's name in the ship's bell. So if you're ever going to Midway or the Yorktown or any ship out there, look inside the ship's bell, and you'll see dozens of kids' names inscribed on the inside.
What a group. Thank you very much, Leon, Lyle, Gary. Wow, they've got the stories to tell. we are open for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Remember, we're covering from World War II to the current. Anyone have any questions on naval aviation? I can't believe it, no questions? Well then, I would like to close today's briefing with an academic note concerning... No? Okay, wait, okay. I would like to conclude with an academic note here that is not well known. Many naval personnel, enlisted naval personnel, labor under the conception that the Marine Corps is part of the Navy. Now, academically, if the Marine Corps were part of the Navy, then the #1 man in the Marine Corps, the Commandant, the #1 man in the Marine Corps, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, would then report to the #1 man in the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations. But he doesn't. The Commandant of the Marine Corps reports to the Secretary of the Navy, a civilian. Therefore, the Navy is responsible to the Marine Corps for funding and materiel, but there is no chain of command involved at all. Well, on that light note, thank you very much for your attendance today. There's going to be a briefing at 1300 now on Korea, and then at 1400 we will have another briefing on survivors from the Pacific Theater, including the Doolittle Raid, Flying Tigers and such. So if you've got time on your hands, this is the place to be. Thank you very much.